Okay, before I packed it away last year, I did get a bit of work done on the hull. If you recall from the last video, there was a fair sized section here of the second layer of planks that wasn't completed. But there was a small section of 3 planks on the bottom that was done. First thing I had to do was remove those 3 layers of planks. On each side there was a set of 3 on each side, and I had to continue working down from the upper set all the way to the bottom to get the proper spoilers at the back end to shape it properly to the hull. So it pays to not try to skip ahead and start from the bottom up when you're 3/4 of the way down here. Pays to check directions over, make sure you're doing things the right way. A lot of double checking, referencing between the written directions and the plans. The nameplate and the chain hawse are added. The hole is there for the chain hawse. I also drilled all of the scupper holes along the deck. We added these taff rails, and the cap rails were added, and a little bit of work was done up here on the front end. I even drilled already for the bowsprit. Another little bit of tricky work that got done last year was attaching the rudder post and the rudder and the props. I've bent those props a couple of times since adding them, so you might want to consider doing that a bit later in the project. Just like I'm saving now, I'm saving the cap rail, the railing, for just before completion, because I just see the brass wire there getting bent to heck as you try to do other things on the ship. So as you're going along, you got to try to decide what order you're going to do things in for yourself more than sticking directly to the plans, because you can find you get in a bit of trouble here and there with stuff. Those hinges, you got to cut the notches in the rudder for those. There's a little brass pin that goes through the middle of each one. You got to bend, shape those hinges yourself to hold the pins and to fit into place. And then there's, nailing it all down and getting it all attached properly. I did a bit of work on the deck too. Everything's had a couple of coats of kind of a satin varnish at this point. I drilled and installed the hawse pipe holes. I drilled for both of the masts, the right size holes. I got the deck mounted cleats and rings mounted, and I pre-drilled for the venting pipes. So a lot of those holes at this point are pre-drilled, along with the holes for the belaying pins in each of those racks, and the holes in the cap rail here for the railing stanchions. They're little wooden stanchions that hold the brass railing. I got the holes drilled in the stern cover, and the hole for the rope cut in the stern cover. A lot of the white's been painted several coats at this point for a nice bright white color. And that's most of the work done on the deck as of getting the kit open again this winter. That work was all done last year, but I'm ready to start some new stuff now. Okay, these are the little stanchions that are supplied to go into the cap rail on the deck, and brass wire goes through them to make up your railing that goes around the cap rail. Now these are pretty small parts, really small, and they don't come with a hole pre-drilled in them, and it's recommended to have a 0.50 millimeter hole. Well, the smallest bit that I could find was about a 0.79, and that would not fit into anything at all, a drill, rotary tool, or anything at all. So I ended up having to use the bit itself to drill a hole into the end of this little bit of paintbrush tip. I cut this bit of wood off the tip of a paintbrush, and I used this bit to drill a little hole into it, and then I epoxy glued the bit into it like that to allow me to spin the bit with my fingers and hand drill every one of these little holes through these very tiny rail stanchions. So I hope that little trick helps. I managed to actually get through each one without splitting. It's slow and painstaking, but they all look pretty good, and I'm sure the brass wire is going to fit through them okay. Now, even before you install it, you can see that they come a fair bit below the cap rail. So all of those still are going to have to be cut off just so there's just enough to glue into the cap rail with nothing hanging below. So you can have a bit of fun with that project. There's quite a few of those to do. The only other thing that I'm lucky enough to have going on that's in the process for me is my wife has been doing the stitching on all of the sails a little bit last year during the winter, and now this year she's going around and actually sewing the rope all the way around each sail for me, as suggested in the plans, to give it a little more authenticity. I noticed that in the photo on the cover of the box, they didn't bother with any of this sewing at all. All they did was hem them up and just pop the brass pieces right through the sailcloth to rig them up. So they say in the plans that adding this kind of detail gives it a little more of an authentic look. There's stitching, some pretty fine stitching going along where they would have originally been stitched. All of those sails would have been made out of long strips sewn together, and then they would have had a rope sewed all the way around them to be able to attach the proper hardware to rig the sails up to the masts. So I appreciate the work she's done. All the credit for the detail in the sails will have to go to her. Little brass ring will go right through that loop. each corner of each sail for the hardware. Great work. So that leads me to pretty much where I got to go from here. The next step before I go gluing down any of the deck superstructure is to get the masts built and get them fitted and ready to be glued in. Just prior to doing all of the rigging, first I got to set up the masts. So as you can see, trying to set masts up and glue superstructure to the deck, you'd be wrecking that little handrail and any little details along the edges. You know, you can't put the belaying pins in the racks or anything yet till you get a lot of that work out of the way. There's a lot of fine rigging to do. But anyway, last year I pre-cut the mast parts to length. You got some 8mm and 5mm material to cut up into different lengths. I had to go through the written instructions carefully and come up with a short list for myself with the different diameters and the different lengths required. These haven't been cut exactly to the length yet. They're all just rough cut to their various lengths so that I can trim them down a little if one end is rougher than the other. So one of the short pieces here is for the bowsprit. The two large ones are for the mainmast bottoms. Two medium, this is the main jib boom, and top masts, and the other boom, and so on. Now all of these have to be tapered. The 5mm stuff has to be tapered from 5mm down to 2mm on the ends of most of it, and the two top masts get tapered down to almost a point. The 8mm stuff starts out 8mm on one end. The other end needs to be tapered down to half of its thickness to 4mm. Nice even taper over the whole thing. Now I've been looking at different ways about doing this. Some people would just start sanding by hand, but sometimes you don't get a very even taper that way. So one of the suggestions, they say a lathe is the best way, but not all of us have a little tiny lathe to, you know, work with this kind of material. Then they suggested in the plans to put a little plane between your legs and run the wood over it to plane the taper in, and then when you get it close, to sand it the rest of the way. And their final suggestion, which is what I'm probably going to try, is I'm going to put the dowel itself here into my cordless drill, and I'm going to use a file or sandpaper to act like a little lathe in a way, and try to gently work my taper into each of these pieces. So that's what I got ahead of me next. Another couple of useful tools for working on these models is a ruler with inches and centimeters, but that actually starts measuring from the very end of the ruler. This is really useful in putting stuff, you know, bang on, and then marking a decent measurement somewhere, wherever you need to. But yeah, starting from the end is important. Another useful thing for measuring and plotting the location of things on the deck and elsewhere are your good old, you know, fashioned compass. This can be, you know, pretty exact in measuring and marking and finding centers, etc. And lastly, a good old saw by X-Acto. X-Acto makes these. They make a little miter box too that these work with, that can be pretty handy with wood models. Very fine tooth. thin bladed saw.